So I said I was going to be making my own Bionicle, and by God, I stood by my word. All right, so I teased this yesterday very briefly in the Bar Magna video, but this is where we are at with Skull Shaman. This is what he looks like. He is a protector-sized character, though with the horns he ends up actually being slightly taller, I believe, than the Skull Warrior, who is also sitting in front of me. Now, you look at this and you might say, oh, well, there's no real silver on this character aside from the axe, and that's true. It doesn't have the same color balance as some of the other Skull villains, but that's kind of the point. There are a lot of recolors on here, as you might be able to tell. The gunmetal mask, gunmetal fists, gunmetal bone pieces, even gunmetal feet as well. And that's not even talking about the trans dark blue pieces that show up on this set. I'm really happy with how this looks overall. And yes, Lego, if they had made this, likely would have made the fists silver, the bones silver, the feet silver, and they would all look fine. I don't even think it's necessary to recolor those. The mask definitely needed to be recolored at the very least, though. But still, I think this would have been an exceptional set had we seen it on shelves. Now, obviously, being a protector size set, you'd want to see this cheaper than some of the others. And in terms of the parts count, there's not a lot of parts here. I can't imagine that it's any more than any of the other Skull villains. So I could definitely see this being a $10 set, but you're still kind of getting everything out of this that you would get out of one of the $15 or even $20 sets. You are getting a mask, though granted, this is obviously the Uniter version of this mask. It works just fine for the sake of this video, and honestly, looks great. Maybe you could even think of that as being a part of the story. Maybe instead of it being a corrupt mask, these characters have to defeat these bad guys, these Skull villains, to upgrade to their Uniter form in the first place. I don't know. Just a silly thought, but it works, and it looks quite nice. On top of that, in terms of the transparent orange, I actually ended up working a little bit more in because I've actually taken pictures of these and shared them on Discord as well. But for one thing, these claws on the end of that wrist-mounted axe, which work quite nicely. The idea being that, well, it's just for ripping masks off, right? Nothing fancy. And then, of course, you also have the transparent orange on the arm, on the back of the neck here, eye stalk, of course, and even on the back of the weapon to highlight the eyes of that galley mask, which works out beautifully. The actual function here is also quite nice as well. If you looked at the video that I talked about yesterday, not the Bar Magna expansion video, but the other one, the first one, I talked about making my own Generation 2 Bionicle. And in that, I talked about how the function was going to be kind of a hybrid between my original Skull Shaman design, which this is not that far from, and my Skull Harbinger set, which actually had wings that would flap. And so the idea is that you can press on the back of the arms here. There's a little, extra exposed pin there, and you can literally just press that, and yeah, it'll lift the arms up, and he can taunt essentially with it. That's at least the main idea. And the one issue that I do have, unfortunately, is just that these pieces that Lego makes, they have an axle and a pinhole in them. They just don't have very good grip. That seems to be pretty true across the board, unfortunately. So they do come out of those axle holes very easily. Maybe if I swap this around to a different piece, that might help. I'll test that out later. But suffice to say, it still looks excellent. On top of that, as I mentioned, the transparent dark blue pieces include the shortest style of bone here, the 5-length bone up in the upper arm, as well as both joints on this side here. And one of the joints in the legs, you get 4 of those, 2 of the small bone piece. And then, of course, probably most notably in dark blue here, the ribcage piece on the weapon. Since this is a small character, I didn't want it to take up the actual torso of this build, and I thought, of course, using this was going to look really nice as that torso as well. But all of the other Skull villains have that ribcage piece, and it's very important to include it here. So I talked in that video kind of how I was making the parts like this, and that is still true, making the dark blue parts specifically using a sort of cold dye method that I'm working on, and I'll continue to work on that process as time goes on, while the gunmetal pieces were made with a hot dyeing process, and they took seconds to make, but because of that, they can be very hard to match because you have very little time to actually work with that, and that's at low heat, maybe 140, 150-ish degrees, possibly more. With all of that said, though, let's go ahead and compare the actual figure here to Skull Warrior. Honestly, I don't want to say he's my favorite of the bunch, because he is a very boring figure overall, but he is a very well designed figure in my opinion, and this is roughly the size here. So you can see with the horns, he ends up actually being quite a bit taller, but without the horns, then, you know, he's protector sized, which is nice. It works out well enough. I guess maybe he's technically a little bit taller than the protectors, given that he has the extenders in the legs there. And you could very easily have done the longer version of the bone here, the 4-length bone in the trans dark blue. And I considered that, but I did want to actually work in a little bit of that dark gray color, hence why it's also on the back here. And also I just wanted something to kind of break up that knee design, right? Especially in this area here. So I thought using the extenders worked out to give it a little more something to look at, you know, nothing fancy. But I'm really happy with it overall, and I'm actually going to try to price out making more of these. I know that there at least is going to be one person that asks in the comment if these are for sale. No, not right now. But if I can manage to scrape the pieces together at a low enough cost, then yeah, potentially I could see myself making more of them. The main thing that's obviously going to slow me down is the ribcage and the trans light blue. This one here is actually a bootleg one, which that caused some problems when it came to actually dyeing the piece. I will test new bootleg ones without an acetone wash, because that's what I tend to do in my solution, just to see if it will still take dye on its own. If that works, then that's a really good sign, because it means that I can make these pieces in mass really cheaply. However, if I have to rely on Lego's trans light blue ribcage pieces, that's going to be a little more expensive. They're not a crazy price. They're like 75 cents to $1 a piece, but you know, that always adds up, right? And then when you look at the mask being about $1 and so on and so forth, you could look at $10 or $15 being spent just on the parts to make the character and then get them shipped here another, you know, $5. By that point, is anybody going to want to buy these for 20 bucks? I don't know. It's nice to look at the fact that it's a fan-made item, and of course you have to make them, source the parts, kind of think about your labor, and I think that's the hardest part of all, right? Because you don't want to ever feel like you're ripping somebody off, charging them a price, but at the same time, you hope that they understand that you're not Lego. You don't have access to the machinery that Lego has. You don't have access to the convenience that Lego has, that everything that you make is your time being taken from you, right? And so it's the most adult thing to do is charge for your time, right? And of course, looking at this, I don't know how much I could charge for something like this, but that's what the future is for. So with all of that being said, the last thing I want to mention too, which was related to the last video, the Bar Magna expansion project, someone asked me a question in the comments talking about if I was going to name the overarching story. And at the time, I just woke up, so I was like, yeah, of course. I don't know what that name will be, but I already have a name for it. I wrote it down. I just was sleepy. And so much like how 2004 City of Legends or 2006 trilogy, the Ignition, you know, they all kind of have their own names. My thought was that at least 2010 was going to be called Sky Collapse. And the reason being, again, that this is sort of a fight for resources, but they're new resources, obviously, and positioning yourselves within this new society that you find yourself in after the Reformation of Bar Magna. And of course, it is a sort of sky pirate themed, and dragon themed for that matter, you know, world that we are finding ourselves in, right? So that means that there's a lot of things to be done in the sky, as well as obviously on the ground. So that's just the thought. Let me know your thoughts on that name, and of course, let me know your thoughts on this character here. Of course, if you did enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because it does mean that you'll see more content like this, and it helps me out greatly. On top of that, you can also join the conversation in the comments. As you know, I read all of them, and you can also check out Instagram, Discord, and Patreon if you want to support the channel and get some perks and support what it is I do here. That's all in the description. See you all in the next one. Take care.